She sold her mother's Bible first, then the quilt, then the brass locket with her father's face pressed behind the glass. And when none of it was enough, when the numbers still didn't add up and the debt collectors still came knocking, there was nothing left to sell but herself. That is where we find Nora Finch, 18 years old, standing on a wooden platform in the afternoon heat of Coldwater Ridge, with her chin lifted so high you might think she was proud. But her knees told a different story. They wanted to give way beneath her. She wouldn't let them. Her father had raised her to face whatever the frontier threw at her without flinching. He just hadn't imagined the frontier would throw something like this. Here is the first thing to understand about Nora, and about anyone who has ever stood in a place they never chose to be. She did not wait to feel brave before she acted brave. She stood tall not because she wasn't afraid, but because she understood, somewhere deep in her bones, that the only power left to her was how she carried herself. That is a lesson worth holding on to. Dignity is not something the world can take from you. It is something you choose to keep, even when everything else is gone. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the heat like a whip. The men below looked up at her in ways that made her skin crawl, and she fixed her eyes on a knot in the wood above their heads and tried not to hear the numbers being called out. 200, 250. She was being measured in dollars and cents, like a plow or a horse, and she refused to let that measuring define her. 300. The new voice was different, quieter, almost reluctant. Nora's gaze dropped before she could stop herself, and she found a tall man standing at the back of the crowd. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low, and his face carried the kind of weathering that only comes from years lived hard under an unforgiving sun. But the way he looked at her, that was different from all the others. He didn't look at her with want. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he isn't sure he wants to solve. 350. The tobacco man stepped forward, grinning through missing teeth. The tall man's jaw tightened. $400. The crowd went quiet. 400 was more than most men in Coldwater Ridge made in half a year. Nobody spoke. Nobody countered. And the auctioneer's voice rang out, sold to Mr. Calhoun, and Nora's knees finally buckled just slightly before she caught herself on the railing. Mr. Calhoun. She knew the name. Largest cattle ranch in the territory, 15 miles north of town. A widower, 2 young children. A man they said was fair but hard, the kind who didn't waste words or time. What they hadn't said, what she was now learning, was that he was the kind of man who would spend $400 on a stranger without blinking. The wagon ride north was almost entirely silent. The landscape shifted from scrubby flatland to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and cedar. The air smelled like dry grass and the ghost of rain that would never come. Nora twisted her hands at her lap and tried to imagine what her life would look like now. A cook, probably. A housekeeper. Whatever she needed to be. She told herself that whatever waited ahead couldn't be worse than what she'd left behind. That is the second thing worth understanding. When we are in the middle of the worst chapter of our lives, we rarely have the luxury of knowing that things are about to change. Nora didn't know. She just decided, quietly, without drama, and without anyone applauding her for it, to keep going. That decision, made in the silence of a moving wagon on a dusty frontier road, was the most important one she would ever make. "I have 2 children," he said at last, breaking the silence like a stone dropped into still water. "Twins, a boy and a girl. They're 6 years old." He paused. Their mother died when they were 4, a fever that wouldn't break. Nora glanced at him. His voice was flat, like a man reciting facts rather than speaking about grief. She had heard that tone before, in her own voice, in the months after her father's drinking had gotten bad, when she'd learned to say the hard things without feeling them, because feeling them was a luxury she couldn't afford. Why did the other housekeepers leave? The question slipped out before she could pull it back. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. The children ran them off. Lizzie and Sam don't take well to strangers. Nora's stomach sank. Difficult children. That explained the $400. Nobody else wanted the job badly enough. "I won't promise I'm good with them," she said carefully. "I don't have experience." "Didn't ask you to promise anything." He shifted the reins in his scarred hands. "You'll do your best, or you won't. Either way, you've got a roof and 3 meals a day. That's better than what you had this morning." It was blunt. It stung, and it was completely true. The ranch emerged from the fading light like something out of a story. Sprawling and wooden, with a wide porch, several barns, a bunkhouse where the hands slept. Chickens scattered as the wagon rolled through. A dog came running and barking until Mr. Calhoun told it to hush. Everything looked well kept but tired, carrying the weight of too much work and not quite enough hands to do it. He climbed down from the wagon without helping her, just walked toward the porch and called out, "Lizzie, Sam, come here." 2 small figures came tumbling through the door like they'd been wound up and released, thin and wiry, sun-bleached hair, faces dusted in freckles, and eyes, identical blue eyes that were far too suspicious for 6-year-olds. They stopped at the edge of the porch and stared. "This is Miss Finch. She'll be staying with us. You'll treat her with respect." The boy crossed his arms. "The last lady said we were demons." "The one before that cried," said the girl, her voice high and sweet with steel running underneath it. "She cried every night. We could hear her through the walls." "Are you going to cry?" Sam asked Nora directly. Nora looked at the 2 of them, small and fierce and guarded, wearing their hostility like armor. And something in her chest loosened because she recognized them. Not their faces, but the thing behind their eyes. She'd worn that same look herself for years, every time a new bottle disappeared from the cabinet and she'd had to decide whether to pretend she hadn't seen it. These weren't demons. They were scared children who had lost the person they loved most and watched stranger after stranger fail to fill the hole she'd left. Every time, the stranger had left. Every time. She crouched down to their level. "I might," she said honestly. "I cry sometimes when I'm sad or angry. But I won't cry because of you. I promise you that." The twins exchanged a glance, some silent conversation passing between them that no adult could fully translate. "Do you know any stories? Good ones, not boring ones." "I know some good ones." "Can you braid hair?" Lizzie reached up and touched her own tangled mess. "Yes." "Can you shoot?" Sam's voice was a challenge wrapped in a question. "I can learn." Sam uncrossed his arms. "Pa says the same thing. He says if you're willing to learn, you can do just about anything." That is the 3rd lesson buried in this story, and it might be the most practical one. The children didn't open up because Nora was charming or impressive. They opened up because she was honest and she was willing. She didn't pretend to be what she wasn't. She didn't perform warmth she didn't feel. She showed up as herself, uncertain, willing, and real, and they recognized it, because children, more than anyone, can smell the difference between someone who is genuine and someone who is performing. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of her life. The twins tested her constantly, hiding her shoes, putting salt in the sugar bowl, releasing the chickens from their coop right before bedtime. Sam could disappear when chores came around with the skill of a seasoned ghost. Lizzie could lie with such a straight face that Nora nearly believed her when she claimed the dog had eaten all the biscuits. But Nora didn't cry. She didn't yell. She met every trap, every trick, every test with the same steady patience, and slowly the armor began to come off. She braided Lizzie's hair every morning, working through the tangles gently while telling stories about princesses who wore trousers and climbed mountains themselves. She taught Sam to make biscuits from scratch, showing him how to work the dough until it was just right, how to know by the feel of it when it was ready. She learned their rhythms, the way Sam grew quiet when something hurt, the way Lizzie got louder when she was scared. And through all of it, Daniel Calhoun watched from a distance. He was gone most days, out on the land with his hands, fixing fences, tending cattle, keeping the whole sprawling operation from falling apart through sheer force of stubborn will. He came in for meals and ate in silence, his eyes moving between Nora and the children like he was trying to solve an equation he didn't have enough variables for yet. He never praised her. He never criticized her. He just watched. It made her nervous in a way she couldn't quite name. One evening, after the twins were asleep, she sat on the porch to escape the heat. The sun had gone down an hour ago, and the stars had come out in a great sprawling blanket overhead. You could hear cattle lowing somewhere in the dark, and the wind moving through the grass. It was peaceful in a way that Coldwater Ridge had never been. The door opened, and Daniel stepped out. He didn't speak first, just leaned against the railing and looked out at the dark shapes of the hills. "They're good children," Nora said quietly. "They are." He was quiet a moment. Their mother would be proud. It was the first time he had mentioned her directly, and Nora didn't know how to respond. She settled for saying she was sure that was true. "You're good with them," he said then, and there was surprise in his voice he hadn't bothered to conceal. "Better than the others." "I just listened to them." "It's more than that." He turned to face her, and in the dim light from the house, there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Something that looked almost like gratitude, but ran deeper than that. "You treat them like people, not like problems to manage. They deserve to be treated like people." He nodded slowly, opened his mouth, closed it again. The moment stretched between them heavy with things neither of them had words for yet. "Thank you," he finally said, "for staying. I didn't have much choice. You had a choice every day." He pushed off the railing. "You could have made this harder than it needed to be. You didn't." He went back inside before she could respond, and Nora sat there in the dark with her heart beating faster than she had any right to allow it. She told herself it was just satisfaction, relief at having done her job well. But something in the way he had looked at her made her think about things she had no business thinking about. Summer burned into autumn, and the work intensified. Extra hands were hired for the cattle drive, rough men who looked at Nora with open curiosity until Daniel made it wordlessly, unmistakably clear that she was under his protection. The twins began helping without being asked, carrying water, feeding the chickens, doing small tasks with the particular pride of children who had been trusted. Nora found herself settling into a rhythm that felt, dangerously, almost like belonging. She learned the land around the ranch, the best places to find wild herbs, the way the light changed as the seasons shifted. And she learned him, too. His name was Daniel, though only his children called him that. He was fair with his men, but demanding, and he worked harder than all of them, up before the sun, in bed long after dark. He had a scar on his left hand from a broken fence wire, and another on his collarbone from a horse that threw him when he was young. He drank his coffee black and hated beans, but ate them anyway because they were cheap and filling, and this was not a life built on preferences. He was also deeply, quietly lonely. She could see it in the way he sat apart at mealtimes, in the way he sometimes stopped in the middle of working to stare at nothing. He loved his children fiercely, but didn't know how to talk to them about anything that truly mattered. He had loved his wife, and losing her had carved something out of him that hadn't grown back. He had walled the wound off instead, the way people do when grief is too large to move through, and the wall had held, until now. Then came the night the twins got sick. It started with Lizzie complaining about her stomach at supper. By bedtime, she was burning with fever. Sam followed an hour later, pale and shaking. Nora worked through the night, sponging them down with cool water, coaxing them to drink, watching their small faces twist with discomfort. When Daniel came in around midnight and found her sitting between their two beds with one hand on each child's forehead, his voice was stripped raw with fear. "How bad?" "Fever, but they're strong. They'll fight it." "Their mother." He stopped, swallowed hard. She understood then what she was really hearing. This wasn't just a sick child. This was his worst nightmare walking back through the door. This was the thing he had been afraid of every single day for the past 2 years. She stood up and crossed to him, and without planning to, without thinking about what it meant, she put her hand on his arm. "They're not her," she said firmly. "They're fighters, Daniel. Look at them." It was the first time she had used his name. He flinched as though she'd struck him, but he didn't pull away. He just stood there, looking down at her hand on his arm, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I can't lose them." "You won't. I won't let you." She said it with more certainty than she felt, but he needed to hear it, and so she said it. They worked together through the rest of the night. He held Sam while she got medicine into him. She sang to Lizzie while he changed the cool cloths on her forehead. They didn't talk much, but every time their eyes met across the dim room, something passed between them, something that had nothing to do with the children and everything to do with what people become to each other when they face fear together. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of the whole story, not the romantic one, but the human one. We are revealed by what we do in the dark hours, when no one is watching and there is no reward and everything is uncertain. The people who stay and work and hold steady, those are the people who are worth keeping close. Nora didn't stay because it was easy. She stayed because these children needed her, and she had decided somewhere along the way, without quite knowing when, that they were hers to protect. By dawn, the fevers broke. Both twins fell into deep, healing sleep, and Nora sagged with relief so total it nearly took her off her feet. Daniel caught her before she could fall, his hands strong and steady on her shoulders. "Go sleep," he said quietly. "I'll watch them." She wanted to argue. Her body settled the argument for her. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you for trusting me with them." Something cracked open in his carefully guarded face. "I do trust you," he said, "more than I've trusted anyone in a long time." The twins recovered quickly, with the tremendous resilience of children who had not yet learned to be precious about their health. But something had changed in all of them. Lizzie and Sam clung to Nora more, called her Miss Nora instead of just Miss, saved her the best pieces of chicken at supper without being asked. Sam consulted her on important matters, which horse was fastest, whether frogs could really predict rain. Lizzie started calling her our Nora when she talked to her friends. Our Nora. Daniel changed too. He started coming in earlier in the evenings. He stayed to talk after the twins went to bed, and he asked about her life, not to be polite, but because he genuinely wanted to know. And she told him, things she had never told anyone, about her father's drinking, about the shame of standing on that platform, about the terror of not knowing what would come next. And he told her about Mary, how they had met at a church social and married 3 months later, how she was small and fierce and utterly fearless, how the fever had taken her so fast there had barely been time to say goodbye. "I was angry for a long time," he admitted one night on the porch, the stars burning overhead. Angry at God, at the world, at her for leaving, at myself for not being able to stop it. "Are you still angry?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Not as much, not since you came." Nora's breath caught. She knew she should say something safe, something that would keep them in their proper places, maintain the correct distance between employer and employee, between the man who bought her and the woman who kept his house. But she was tired of safe, tired of proper, tired of pretending that what had grown between them in all those quiet evenings and long nights was nothing. "I'm glad I came here," she said instead, "even though it wasn't my choice. I'm glad." He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her heart stutter in her chest. And then the door banged open, and Sam came running out in his nightshirt. "Pa, Miss Nora, there's something in my room." The moment shattered. Daniel was on his feet instantly. They found nothing in Sam's room except a moth that had wandered in through a crack in the window. By the time they had caught it and let it go outside, the spell was broken. Daniel said goodnight and disappeared to his own room. Nora lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Winter arrived hard that year, blanketing the ranch in white and making everything twice as difficult. Pipes froze, the cattle had to be brought down from the high pastures, the wind found every gap in the walls.
The twins loved it completely, building snowmen in the yard, having snowball fights that left them soaked and laughing, tracking snow through the house with absolute zero remorse. One afternoon, Daniel found Nora watching them through the kitchen window, a softness on her face she hadn't even noticed was there. He came up beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "They're happy," he said quietly. "Really happy. I haven't seen them like this since before Mary died. They're good kids. They needed you." He turned to face her fully, and there was no more pretending to read the walls or study the horizon. "We all did. I just didn't know it until you were already here." Nora's throat closed. "Daniel, I know how you came here." His hands clenched at his sides. "I know I bought you like property. It makes me sick to think about it. But I need you to know that is not how I see you." "What am I?" The question came out barely above a whisper. He reached up slowly, giving her all the world to step back, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand stayed there, rough and warm against her cheek. "You are the woman who saved my children," he said. "You are the woman who made this house feel like a home again. You are—" He stopped, swallowed. "You are the woman I am falling in love with, and I don't know what to do about that, but I need to know if there is any chance you feel the same." "I'm 18 years old," she said, and hated how young her voice sounded. "I don't have anything. I don't own anything." "You're everything," he said it fiercely, like a challenge. "Age doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter. You are smart and strong and kind, and my children love you. I love you, Nora Finch. I know I have no right to ask, but I need to know." Nora looked at him, this man who bought her to save her from worse, who had given her a roof and a purpose and something she had never expected to find out here in the hardest land in the world. She thought about the way he looked at his children, the way he worked until his hands bled, the way he had sat with her all night while the fever raged and held the fear at bay through sheer stubbornness. She thought about the space he had made for her in his life, careful, slow, respectful, hopeful. "I do," she whispered. "I love you too. I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to say it." The smile that broke across his face was like a sunrise after a very long night. He held her face in both hands, and when he kissed her, it was gentle and desperate and full of something that felt unmistakably like promise. Nora felt herself lean into it, into him, and for the first time since her father died, she felt something she had almost forgotten the name of. Safe. "Gross," said Sam from the doorway. The boy stood there with Lizzie, both of them grinning with unholy delight. "Are you getting married?" Lizzie demanded. "Because we already